So, yeah, so Stephan, is if you'd like to introduce yourself again and just sort of what you're trying to do with empathy circles at your hospital and the need there and how we can be supportive.
Sure. So I'm Director of Medical Education and Faculty Development in the Department of Psychiatry at a healthcare system called One Brooklyn Health, which is combines 3 different hospitals. All 3 hospitals are safety net hospitals, which care for a population of people who are 95% of them are on what's called Medicaid, which is public, healthcare insurance through the federal government in the United States. And these are people who, due to the social determinants, are disproportionately affected by all sorts of things. But in this case, evidence is already mounting that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting, people who are impoverished and African Americans as a racial group. And that's who we serve and One Brooklyn Health serves to a large extent. Is Afro-Caribbean community, particularly at Brookdale, where I am, and then we have Interfaith and we have Kingsborough, and our organization is literally just on the edge at this moment. Any given day, our 3 hospitals are what are called distressed hospitals, which means they have 15 days of working capital. But now we are in the COVID-19 crisis, which is really pushing the limits. And we are struggling as an organization, as healthcare workers, trying to be there for our patients. And my job was to think about and to implement some scalable, organization-wide virtual interventions that are that can meet and the needs of people who are in acute disaster. And so I was looking for some scalable virtual organization-wide psychological interventions that would help people buoy up their resilience so that they can continue to fight the fight. That resilience includes having some time to take care of yourself so that you can restore your capacity to care for others. And I immediately thought of this practice, the Empathy Circle, from my own personal experience. And I'm a champion of the Empathy Circle at my healthcare system. And I intend to use positive emotional contagion as a champion of the Empathy Circle to spread the positive news about the positive outcomes and the positive experiences that one can have in a very simple practice that just brings us back to our deep roots of just slowing down, having the opportunity to assess and be aware of what's inside us, what emotions are coming up for us, and then to express that and to have someone authentically hear and demonstrate that they understand us, and then for us to give them feedback that we feel fully heard. That simple process is, I believe, what can really help a organization, a group, the world of people who feel like they are alone, like they're fighting whatever they're fighting by themselves, to suddenly realize that there are other people out there in the world who have similar ideas or different ideas, and that we can come together, we can hear each other, and we can be heard, and we can problem solve together and grow together without challenging one another, without judging one another, and just simply being present in the moment, just as we are, similar to a mindfulness practice, but reaching out and being offering ourselves in a very spacious way, to an optimistic way, to find something positive to grow through this.
Okay, so this is your time. You can open it up. You can ask for reflection, or you can just take questions. And yeah, so how would you like to move forward?
Well, I would like to ask from Marta if you could reflect back on what I've said, possible.
Okay, so you're saying that you're in a very difficult situation because you are trying to help organize and serve all these doctors that are struggling because of the COVID and the pressures, insurmountable pressures that are there, and so you are really on the edge of what is possible in terms of healthcare given the limitations that you have. And so you're trying to come up with strategies that you can offer to your various types of clinicians to help them cope in terms of the service that they're providing, but also their own self-care. And you saw that empathy circles could be a part of that people could listen to each other and they could remain grounded and centered in the presence of all these distractions and pulls on their attention and everything else that is happening. So you specifically said about, that people can remain with the challenge and avoid judging, that they can remain present, and also the optimism, that there was some hope and optimism, that you thought that being in connection and honest and true connection through the empathy circles would bring. Did I get most of it, or is there something?
Yes, thank you, Marta. There's a wonderful article that I've been reading. I subscribe to this thing called the McKinsey Group, McKinsey and Company, and they are a very insightful consulting organization. And there was an article there titled "The Role of Networks in Organizational Change," and this could really be applied, even further, but particularly in that may not be exactly the title, but the point is, in this uncertain time, the normal playbooks that leaders go by in managing situations like that don't apply, and the normal hierarchies don't apply, and it opens us back up to just being part of humanity, and people popping up and having courage and taking risk of making decisions and about for others and for people who wouldn't ordinarily maybe have leadership positions, but pulling the right people together at the right time with the right practice, with the right to do what's needed in a time of uncertainty and need. And Edwin's organization, his vision of a culture for empathy and the processes that he has already created and has in place allows me to lean on him in this situation to take to appreciate, and I don't know if this is too harsh, but to take advantage of in a positive way, to successfully or to effectively and thankfully utilize what Edwin has created to because we didn't have anything prepared and we weren't prepared, but this structure allows us to grow and to use it to build the kind of quick, nimble, help that we need with this structure of the empathy circle. Lou, would you like to help me understand what I said?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, what I hear you talking about is gratitude. I think I hear you expressing gratitude for Edwin and the work that he's done to build a culture of empathy and to find processes to develop the empathy along with the team, the empathy circle team, to develop the empathy circle process and to do the work of making that available, which he has done a huge amount of effort to do that, and all the time and effort and the care that people have contributed to make that possible. Sounds like you're expressing gratitude for that.
And more, the other piece of it is that, again, what I wasn't quite conveying it correctly, but let me try it again. This McKinsey article is about leading through uncertain times.
Right, I'm sorry. So that is the other piece that you expressed, that I dropped, which was about that we need something new in leadership, that it isn't some of the usual top-down, authoritarian kind of leadership. We need something different right now. And that you think an empathy circle process is part of that. Having empathy and empathic response is part of that.
And more than that, though, again, it's this spontaneous network of team building that occurs, and we're seeing it right this moment. So at the meeting we just had at One Brooklyn Health for some of the healthcare workers, we saw people come together from around the world, who don't know one another, don't even know each other's names, but had some basic human authenticity, followed the basic rules of the empathy circle, and came together demonstrating the love and the capacity of humans to work together in times of great need in a very a quick, spontaneous, just out of the box intervention or process that just creates an atmosphere that builds and buoys resilience. It's just magical.
Yeah, so I hear you recognizing and acknowledging and kind of celebrating the role of networks of people, relationships that can form quickly, organize quickly, respond quickly, and connect in a way that has a lot to do with empathy to create something new that was not there before, to influence change, to make change, and to make a difference. And you think there's a magic to that, and you think it's beautiful, and you're celebrating it.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to express. Thank you. And then I'll just say, Edwin, of course, he has this strong interest in, working with people in political divide, and last night I happened to Zoom bomb, Edwin and Will, is it Bill? In their private Zoom meeting, I accidentally came into their meeting at like 10 or 11 p.m. I can't even remember what time it was, and I was just I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed at that moment, and you know, and there's a lot of this is all new, and you know, this COVID-19 is going like the Black Plague did. The Black Plague, the Black Plague totally changed medieval culture. I mean, there was a very stiff hierarchy of you know, 5% nobility, 5% royalty, 5% knights, and 90% of the workers, and you know, and that all was wiped clean as a result of the Black Plague, causing a disruption in the interdependency of that hierarchy. And I think too that COVID-19 is going to disrupt many, you know, ways of being that we thought were just, you know, the way it is, and this process, you know, this empathy circle, is just a way for what is natural and what is out there in the universe, you know, for us to find a way forward, whatever that is different, unique, and applicable to what we discover that we need right now, you know, as a society and as humans.
Yeah, so in this piece, I hear you saying that much like the Black Plague played a part in helping to break down social hierarchy and bring in something new in terms of human relations and societal relations, you think COVID-19 is going to have a similar effect because it's causing us to behave differently and to respond differently and to care for one another. It's kind of, everyone's vulnerable to the virus. We're all human, even though we might have different stations right now in the hierarchy. And so it may have a similar effect. And you see I'm guessing this, I'm inferring this, one of the things that you like about the empathy circle is that it is based on mutuality and just seeing each other's humanness. And so there is no hierarchy in the empathy circle. It is an equalizing, connecting process. And so it fits, it's very appropriate, and it fits perfectly with this moment and the idea of trying to make society more equal, more fair.
Yes. And Bill, could I say something to you and reflect back?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the healthcare field, you know, I mean, personally, I spent you know, a great deal of my life in education, and you know, in certain circles that would give me certain status, and but what I find is that each time I participate in these, people of all walks of life who perhaps don't have any clue what medicine is, have offered me tremendous breakthroughs in my own thinking and insight, and improved my awareness just by simply listening to me on my journey. And I imagine that happens for other people. And this openness, this curiosity, and this special way of listening just reflecting is odd to many people, but once they try it, you know, they'll see it like I think I see it, or I experience it.
Okay. So you were talking about how your, years in medicine and also education gives you a certain kind of status. And what you're really appreciative of is in the empathy circle, where there is no real hierarchy per se. You've been greatly enhanced and helped by people from all walks of life who just by reflecting have helped you, come to some very important insights.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I just want to say one last thing. As what developed in the small breakout room in the last meeting that I had was a personal connection I had with the chairman of emergency medicine, where the greatest challenges are happening right now across the world. I invited her, and she agreed to participate because of my personal bond with her, because she had just left a C-suite meeting, which is deciding the literal fate of my community, of their lives, and she told this leadership group that she needed to leave because she needed to participate in an empathy circle, and that courage to say that and to trust me to participate in this crazy situation where people are going to catch feelings from one another. She found, but she found it very helpful, and she more even than I, of course, with her power and her level of status in the hierarchy, can be a champion for the empathy circle and what it represents and what it can do, for our organization at this time. Bill, do you?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to reflect. So you were really touched by a friend who's the head of the emergency room, who's really on the front lines and had to leave a very important meeting and come to the empathy circle. And a lot of that is due to your personal bond, but also that her insight into how empathy circles really can change and really help healthcare workers and your whole organization communicate and build resilience through this whole thing. And so you just really, more broadly speaking, again, coming back to the point where, we can all, as human beings, help each other. Now, you said it quite a lot, and I might have missed a few things. Is there any other major point that I missed?
Just that this is weird, and
right.
that and it's so counter culture to certainly healthcare, but I think it's not how normal people operate in their relationships for the most part. It's contrived in some ways, you might say, in some ways, it might be to our advantage to, express some of that weirdness but that's what sometimes it takes to break down barriers, to find new ways of being, of acting, and there will be naysayers, and there are many, in all walks of life. I mean, can you imagine? And this is one I'll say regarding to Edwin. Edwin's like, I think it'd be wonderful if we could get Congress do empathy circles. What we could do in terms of a meeting in the middle and collaborating and thinking about how we can move forward as a country. I mean, people will just like, oh, who is this? I mean, what kind of nut do we have here? But that is something that I wanted to also make sure and express.
Sure. So you wanted to talk about how this process is really outside the norms of our communication and how it feels weird and strange. And that also you talked about Edwin's aspirational views to get the Congress involved, which seems to many people to be out of touch with the reality of the situation. But nevertheless, it opens up areas of communication that people maybe shouldn't feel that are closed, and opens up. And that, as weird as it might be, and as uncomfortable and as many naysayers, you really feel again and again it has value and worth.
Yes, I think I'm good. I don't know where I am on time, but thank you.
Okay, great. So did you have any questions? Because we're here to support this effort. We've been focusing on with Extinction Rebellion, but we can really we can start pivoting, at least I can, towards supporting you in the healthcare field. So just having maybe ongoing, building a team, specifically for this, meeting on a regular basis, and see how we have some more empathy circles, I think, that you have planned with the staff, nurses, etc.
I was just going to lean on you, Edwin, and assume that you were going to help me make that happen, because you've done it so far. I'll just say, I guess the two things that I'm thinking about. One is just so far I've been putting the names of the people and sending out the invites, and within my organization, and I need to get better at that, and I think that'll be the way, I guess, unless there's some other creative way that will come out in the group at some point. Or yes, you had a question. You're going to answer me, Carolina?
I just wanna. I don't know. It's not maybe a question, but kind of reflection. I was thinking about specificity of this job, and we noticing how permanently in hurry are people in a workplace. The medical staff, doctors, probably nurses, and others the same. And we should think a little bit not about the empathy circle itself, but about the organization of the whole meeting, because 2 hours definitely doesn't fit, because all the doctors has to drop out.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work. We have to find kind of solution for that, to help them start and end, feel like they don't drop out. They have the whole things together, kind of. It's not like they break something. They have to feel that they're complete.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad you expressed that. I was a little fearful to express that because I'm so thankful of it. But I did get the sense from some of my residents that they loved it, but that when they left, they felt like they were failing the empathy circle because they had to drop out, or maybe they could only do 1 hour, and they felt like they that they had failed.
I see Marta wants to say
Marta and
something.
Lou.
Hi. So, Stephan, you know me a little bit by now, that I always have all these ideas, right? And they might not be useful, but I still like to talk about them. So we're very happy to support, right? But thinking about how can it be the most useful, I think I mentioned before, would be finding someone local, whether that's graduate students and training a dozen of that are sitting at home doing nothing, training a dozen of them, so that you have them on call alongside us, so we can work with them, so we can multiply, so we can be more available. The other thing is, given that you have so little time and that it's so hard for people to be available while they're doing their job, I have a question, which is, when you change shift, because people are working on shifts, does everyone change shift at regular times, or is it throughout? How does that work? So that'd be a question. Because what I've done, totally different circumstances, but what I've done with Extinction Rebellion, so the environmental group, was that we had empathy buddies. So that might be 2 people are finishing a shift and 2 people are starting the shift, right? Mm-hmm. So they're swapping, and they'd stop for, could be 10 minutes, could be 20 minutes at that moment in time. And they do a little mini empathy circle with each other as a way of, how was your shift? You could unload anything that you're with before you go home, so you can actually rest when you go home. So you sort of, and so I'm just bringing that to you, something to think about, that once people know the method, so first is learning the method, but once people learn the method, that might be also a thing, is to catch them at that bit where they're more available because they've not started yet, or they're about to leave, and do something there.
I just want to say
and then alongside that as well, empathy circles are great. It's also, what other things are you offering people? Because like mantra singing, and there's all these meditations by Sarah Payton that would be like, to calm down your nervous system, and
so we have
even rocking together, all those other things.
There's 4 things we're doing right now in the acute phase of the disaster. These are the 4 things that I've been able to come up with. Number 1, I have a mindfulness teacher in New York City who's well known in the MDSR field, named John Aaron, and he's going to offer called a 10-minute mind your stress a session, which will be on demand. They'll be offered at 1:30 p.m., 5 p.m. twice a day, 1:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. Which a link will be sent out, and people will just be able to join, and then they don't have to do anything. They just have to find a quiet place and just listen. Now that is an opportunity that is easy, but you can also imagine that because it is not as much engagement, back and forth engagement like this, that it could also be, depending on your own personal intention, it may not be nearly as effective, but it is easy. So what I'm hearing Marta talk about is this strain between having something that is easy to offer and something that also is really valuable. So this empathy circle, in some ways, seems more valuable in the way that there's an engagement of the person, a back and forth engagement that really draws you into it. But that itself creates difficulties. I'm just speaking about the actual process. Your other suggestion about teaching up and stuff is wonderful. You know, but I don't have, one group that I could access would be if I could access medical students, but again, that has a hierarchy and would be trying to break down so many barriers. It would be very difficult because, you know, you know, medical schools have deans and, you know, all these different layers, and then there are boards, and there, you know, there are people who are concerned about these vulnerable medical, I mean, you know, whatever group you choose who would not, you know, could be a lot of difficulties, but yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful idea, and I'll keep it in my mind, but thinking of that group, but yeah, so thank you for this.
Sorry, I remember you outlining 4 points. Could you outline the other?
Ben, I'm
two?
sorry, Ben, I'm sorry. That was first was Lou, then I saw Leona and Marta.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I wanted to, some of my thinking was similar to Marta's in terms of how to cope with the time challenge. So one thing about inviting people, so one strategy you might use is each one invite one. So rather than sending out broad invitations, you start with people who've experienced the empathy circle and you ask them to invite someone to an empathy circle, because a personal invitation usually results better. So each one invite one. Then the other thing I'd say, and this kind of actually fits with each one invite one, the idea of forming empathy buddies, and it could be people who are in the same part of the hierarchy. So a pair of nurses, a pair of doctors, or something like that. And they become buddies, meaning they train the empathy circle process together. They become connected because they've shared with each other in the empathy circle. They have some level of connection. So then in the work environment, they can take a moment very quickly and reconnect with each other because they have trust and hear each other for a few moments. And you can even think of that as like emergency empathy or bandage empathy or injection, you know, an empathy injection. You could put it in medical culture, you know, the idea that they would connect with each other for a moment to give each other empathy to help with a situation, or connect with a patient for a moment to give them empathy that would help improve the situation. So that might be ways to fit it into the culture and into small bits of time, but you do still need a large block of time for training to help people understand it, understand themselves, how to offer it, and to create connections between buddies. I think you need a longer period of time for that.
I'm absolutely going to take that idea, the invitation part, and they bring a buddy to the empathy circle. That I can do immediately, for sure. And the other idea is very fascinating about somehow, you know, I mean, it would have to be on a different, well, level than I am, of course, but to bring this idea of these buddy, or I guess it could just spread within the empathy circles of suggesting, take this, intentionally encourage people who participate in the empathy circle to find a buddy in the empathy circle, and then to start to use this practice in the workday, you know, and to spread it that way as well.
Yeah, or if they've been in the empathy circle and they see the value in the process, say, think of someone that you work with that you think would be great to be a buddy to do this with, and then bring them and get them trained too, and then they could form that as a resource for each other.
So in terms of the stack, I think Leona and then Ben, was that right?
No, Marta.
Oh, Marta. Leona, Marta, and then Ben.
Thanks, Stephen, for really speaking to this. So I have a daughter who's a registrar, so I don't know where that sits in the American system, but she's a first year in her training as an anaesthetist and has ICU experience. And what I'm noticing is young doctors really, and we're prepping here still, we're not in the same phase of COVID as the States is. I'm worried about PTSD for young healthcare professionals, or actually anybody on the front line of COVID. That could be the hospital cleaner, it can be the hospitality staff in the environment, the ICU nurses. Kate tells me beyond, they kind of hold the whole system together. And in Australia, what I'm hearing from another colleague who's involved in medical student training is that they are starting to prep final year med students to start work. So they are learning to do cannulations online to get them ready to go and be in the ordinary wards, not the COVID wards.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just thinking about where I'm going with this is a question around empathy circles as a form of professional development, especially with your background in psychiatry, supervision and professional development, it being recognized as that. And it really offers us this window in process of helping people work with what's coming up for them and to be deeply heard and not end up with PTSD. Because one of the things that we know shifts people out of it potentially being a PTSD situation is being deeply heard and feeling empowered. And you spoke to that when you said it affected your practice, it impacted your practice and how you work. And I just think it's a really unique process that's not being explored in that kind of professional context. Or maybe it has been and I just haven't heard of it yet.
Well, yeah. Sorry.
No, and the last part was the structure, which Carolina raised, and I just think it's so critical to continue that conversation. I'm really curious about it. When they come off 12, 15-hour shifts, whatever shifts they are working, and it's all disorganized, more disorganized than normal right now, putting aside 2 hours can just, they have got to sleep. They've got to decontaminate, then they've got to sleep, then they've got to get back to work. And somewhere in there they need to connect. I don't know if in the States they're going home, but in Australia they're opening up hotels for healthcare workers so they don't have to go home. So they're going home, not going back to their secure attachment places. They're going to be isolated. And empathy circles, short bursts like Lou's talking about, might be really helpful for that, getting some connection. Albeit short, like I'm thinking, empathy circles that are 5 by 5 by 5, and in 30 minutes you've had a teeny tiny, I don't know, I haven't thought it through, but that's another option is, and they still drop in. So if you don't come off on shift, you haven't missed your empathy circle for the day. They just somehow drop in. And I'd love to hear some feedback about all of that. A bit like Marta, I just have a brain that goes, oh, we could do this, we could do that.
Yeah, well, so can I reflect back on what I heard you say and
sure.
some thinking about it?
Yeah.
The first point was about your someone you have your daughter who early in her training is in anesthesia and. And what they're thinking about around the world about, we need more healthcare workers. Let's graduate them quickly. Let's train them up. Let's put them in the field. Let's help them fight the fight. But of course, they're more vulnerable, and you're also because they don't have the training. They don't have the years on them. They don't have the wisdom, the experience, the way to see beyond this or to have that sort of thing. And then you're wondering about PTSD and, there's, there are different phases of a disaster. There's the pre-disaster phase, the disaster phase and the post-disaster phase. And, in terms of, we worry more about pathology post-disaster, but certainly you need to intervene during the disaster to buoy up people so that they don't, cumulatively develop over time what would then be the end result of PTSD. But for the vast majority of people, they will not develop PTSD. That's just what we know, is that they will be resilient. But there will be a segment of the population who will develop PTSD. And so the sympathy circle is a way of non-pathologizing an intervention, focusing on the positive, focus on enhancing resilience. Not we don't want to. We aren't using the terminology. Aren't thinking in terms of actually treating PTSD right now. What we're imagining is just supporting people's resilience so that they don't ever so that they don't have a buildup of what's called toxic stress. You know, there are different types of stress. Stress is a normal part of our lives, and we all need it. In fact, to grow and to build. And the coronavirus is a stress, but it can also be a stress that overwhelms us, and that becomes a toxic stress. And but right now we're in the phase of just building resilience, and that's what the empathy circle is for, in my mind. But certainly, I have a worry and a concern, like you do, for you know, younger, more or certain vulnerable people, also like people, social workers, maybe people who maybe don't really, maybe there's some aspects of this that, you know, just being a physician, when I wear gloves or when I wear the mask, I have a certain understanding of what that means. But, you know, I've witnessed with my social workers, with maintenance people, with security people, that their perception of the risk is so different, and it's different for everybody. But those people are particularly vulnerable, and these are things that you know, we all need to think about. And I appreciate those points that you mentioned. And I'm sorry, one last thing I'll say about what you said is here in the United States, whoever you happen to live with at the time right before COVID started is who you are with. So if you were a resident that came from China to work in Brooklyn at that hospital, and you live alone, well, you are alone at home. But fortunately today, we have Zoom, and we have WebEx, and we have GoToMeeting, and we have these technologies that allow us to be distant and quarantined, but together through this wonderful virtual technology. Thank God for this technology, so that we can reach out and be together. And I think this is what is it's not just the empathy circle, it's the empathy circle in a virtual environment like this that is what is saving us right now in this pandemic.
Thank you. Yes.
And there was Martha had her. Yeah. Did you?
It was to try and, so I heard you, Stephan, that really grad students, that would be really tricky. There's hierarchy, there's all these other things. But I refuse to give up on the idea that we'll have a whole couple dozen of people, because if we, basically the reason for having more people is if we had more people, they could be available to you on call. So I'm thinking, you know, the people that are leaving your shift or coming into the shift, they can have these people that are on call at some point, right? Because this is a marathon and not a sprint. So
thank you.
So from that point of view, I wonder who's the most non-threatening group? Is it people that are retired? Is it like elderly but able-bodied people at home, retirees that have been teachers? Would it be teachers? That I'm just thinking, what kind of people are sitting at home in New York that we could bring in?
You know, it's tricky. You know, this is what is so tricky about this situation, like none other we've ever seen, is because, you know, usually, you know, healthcare workers, for example, are saving people who, because, you know, they're not in that whatever injury, they weren't injured, they weren't in that car accident, they weren't in that earthquake. So they're there to be 100% there for that other person to save them, you know. But in this situation, there is no one spared. We are all traumatized. I mean, we are all suffering. We're all going through this. We're all afraid. We're all angry. We're all sorts of things at different times, and it's waves. It's waves and waves and waves of experience. You know, there will be one death, and there will be grief, and there will be death, and there will be grief. And this is so unusual because everyone's affected, everyone is vulnerable, and so there's no one person who can come to save the day. But you're right, there are people who are less affected, so you know, in psychiatry, for example, compared to the other doctors, we are less affected in a sense. That's what we thought, and that's what people outside, or you might think that, oh, a psychiatrist, you know, what? Well, first of all, we're personally affected, you know, in our lives. You know, we have our families, we have our loved ones, you know, and then we're also being redeployed. My doctors that I train, who are psychiatry residents and medical students, are being asked to sign up for something they never signed up. They're asked to go on the medicine floor now and take care of these patients, and they are even more vulnerable because, you know, they haven't drawn blood in 5 years. They have not, you know, done a code of CPR in 8 years, or, you know, so I'm struggling to identify, you know, a group, you know, that is untouched, or that really is just free in some sense. But I
maybe I'm not explaining myself properly. Like, I'm not in your environment, right? And people are going, like, I have things in my life, right? I have other things going on. Like, each of us has other things and has our families, and we might be immunocompromised or whatever. We all have things. But when I'm facilitating, I'm facilitating. And so I think what I'm asking is more from the being perceived as non-threatening to people in the medical profession. I suppose that's specifically my question. What group of people in society in general, and, you know, in the normal, would be less threatening to the medical class as just as humans? I don't know if you get my question. Just as humans, would it be, I don't know, you know, would it be teachers over the age of 50? I know it might sound like a silly question, but I'm just trying to, because you understand that better than I do, and so I'm curious. I wish I
could identify a demographic, you know, but when you start thinking about people who are older, of course, you know, they are some of the most vulnerable of all right now in the COVID-19, because they are, you know, your risk, if you are over 65, your chance, you know, my chance of dying is less than 1%. If you're over 65, your chance of dying is about 8%. And if you have a comorbid medical illness, it could be 30%, you know. So, I mean, that's 30 people out of 100. Or 8 out of 100, that's not small numbers. So, you know, when you think about demographics in terms of age stratification, these are certainly not people who are, but yes, if a doctor or healthcare people were going to talk to somebody, I guess they would find it more comforting not to talk to medical students, because they would not get it. But someone older who's lived life, I guess, would be a person who could respond, you know.
Brilliant. Okay. And I just want to mention before that, Ben, the question that Ben was asking was that you said about the mindfulness, and Ben was curious about what other things, you know, you
Ben was up
you
next.
Said 4 things.
Do you want to just ask that, Ben?
Hi, Ben.
Hey. Yeah, no, I already asked my question a little while ago. So
can you just ask it again? Just so
I didn't hear
refresh.
it.
Well, my question was that you raised 4 points. You said you had 4 ideas in mind, and I asked you to explain them, and I remember that you doing that.
Yes.
And I was quite satisfied.
Oh, okay.
That you did that.
I want to be sure that you had your question or comment.
So let me mention the other 2. I'm sorry I didn't mention them. So there's the brief mindfulness interventions. There's the empathy circle. The third is, so we're going to do a large organization-wide, what's called a grand rounds. And we're having an expert who's going to come in and present how you do a resilience plan. Okay. So these are just like Leona was talking about, you know, getting your sleep, you know, don't do too much cocaine, don't drink too much, don't drink too much vodka, you know, don't stay on Facebook all night, you know. So anyway, just create. So that's the third piece, is having everyone in the organization create their own resilience plan, which will be individualized to them with their unique ideas to support their own health and well-being and self-care. And the fourth piece is to add a data piece and using technology. And so what I've come up with, and I'm glad that you brought this back to my attention, because I wanted to share it with Edwin, I wanted to share it with everybody. It's something called Qualtrics. A friend of mine who used to be the CEO for Sony called me and he said, you know, you've got to do this. You've got to get this on board with this immediately. And so I just had an opportunity last night at around 3 a.m. to look at it. It's called, so it's a company called Qualtrics. There are probably others out there, but they're offering it for free right now. And what they have a ready-made program called a Pulse. And so if you're an organization or if you're a group of people and you want to know how your group of people is doing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, whether they feel that they're safe, how they're feeling, do they feel like they have the equipment they need, or whatever it may be. Qualtrics has a ready-made pulse. So they have a 1-minute pulse and they have a 5-minute pulse. And a 1-minute pulse is they send out a questionnaire. And they've already built it out for the healthcare industry, but they built it out for every organization industry you could imagine. And then all you have to do is add your own homegrown technology, your email system, your texting system, whatever it is. And that's what I have today. I had 1 minute with the CEO of my healthcare system, and he didn't know who the hell I was, but I just saw him in the hallway, and I just said, I'm going to take this opportunity. I said, I want to tell you one thing. I recommend you go find out what Qualtrics is, because I'm sure that you want to have a pulse on this healthcare system and your workers. And you know, he kind of didn't get it, but then he started to get it. And then I also happened to see the CNO, which is our chief nursing officer, and she got it because she said she's used it before. So that's the other piece that is necessary, is to really understand what the needs are of the people, and to get a pulse on what people are feeling and thinking, and then you can roll out your interventions and things at different times, depending on what is found to be the need, and to instead of throwing some kind of Leona's point was perfect, but instead of throwing some PTS, like, let me say this. Initially, the first offer that was not under my purview was an offer of a psychological helpline. Well, nobody's using it. Nobody's calling it, because nobody wants to admit right now that they have a psychological problem, or that they want to talk to a psychiatrist. No. So that's why I thought out of the box, I wanted something completely different. I wanted to offer interventions that were not that would stigmatize or pathologize, because that's not where we are right now. What we are right now is we're soldiers in a battle, and we need people to give us water, food, and just and remind us of why we are here, that we're human, that we love the United States, in my example, that we love Brooklyn, and we need just to remind ourselves. And so those 3 other interventions are that, and then this fourth thing is the data piece. So it's called OData in this case, which is organizational data, that helps you build your response effectively and timely.
Cool.
Okay, so
Thanks,
just,
thanks, Stephen.
yeah, thanks, Ben. So just in terms of time, usually we have like 15 minutes, but this is sort of like an emergency situation. So we're kind of really opening up the time. So are you good with more time? There was, looked like 3 more comments or questions, Anne, Leona, and Lou.
So I came home, drove home quickly from the hospital, and I'm at home, and my family's downstairs, and they're like, "What in the hell is he doing?" Because he just got home, and it's Friday, and we want to play. So
okay, so we're gonna let you. You're free to.
I will participate for a couple more. Anything else that anybody can add or?
Okay, there was Anne I saw, and then Leona, and then Lou. Maybe if you could make everything short.
My suggestion was, and someone else has put it in the chat, about having using retired doctors or retired health professionals who wouldn't be threatening, but are more likely to be able to understand situations, even though they're not directly experiencing them, and having those people available so that you have less time pressure on the people who need the support. Or they don't have to be healthcare professionals, but other people, like in this session here, there are several people here who are able to work with the empathy circles and can support anybody who needs it. And so to set things up like that, so it wouldn't be necessary for all those people to be trained because they'd learn as they were doing it. It wouldn't be necessary for the healthcare professionals to be trained, because they would learn as they were doing it with people who were already experienced.
Thank you.
And you could build a network of external people to do that with you, for you.
I just want to say one thing about that. So I had a mentor in medical school who was chair of emergency medicine. He's retired. Of course, he's living the life in Puerto Vallarta, on the Bay of Banderas, in his mansion overlooking the bay. And I called him hoping that he would be a support for me virtually during this time. And I found that it could just be the uniqueness of it, but it was too distant, and his response was too flippant. And he just said to me, "Thank God, Stephan, I'm not there, and I don't think I could do it, and I don't know how you're doing it." And I can say is we've cut off the borders here in Puerto Vallarta, and I'm just praying and hoping we'll have a less impact here, and we're going to stay here as long as we can. We're not coming back to the United States, that's just one person's response, but so at least but that one, which I hoped was going to be a mentor and a safe space for me, it turned out not to be one. But that's just one example, and I'm not going to. One of the things that can happen is you can you can use cognitive distortions to maximize negativity, and use cognitive bias to I wouldn't give up on that idea at all. I just wanted to say that one thing.
Okay, Leona, real quickly, and then Lou.
I think there's a difference to, Stephan, when people volunteer, like they've been contacted somehow and then they reach in, they are less caught off guard and they've processed enough to say, I've got something to offer. And I know that older people are more vulnerable, so they can't go back on the front line, even though there's been call outs to go back in. But they're still on lists. They're still on professional association lists. And they can be reached through the traditional networks of pulling up the database for people who dropped off the list within the last 4 years or whatever. The advantage is that they understand all the shorthand that we use in our individual professions. Like when you say it's a code blue, or my daughter talks about, well, they're not allowed to use the phrase anymore, a dirty zone. They're having to use different language, but nobody has to translate. They get the environment. The disadvantages, they can end up in advice seeking. So also having teachers counselors who may be seeing their practice drop off as we drop into recession. Lots of spare people at the moment. Yep, that was me.
Okay, Luke,
And
do you want
the 2 points I wanted to make very shortly are, one, what you were saying about like setting up a hotline, but then nobody wants to call the hotline because, you know, they don't want to say that they're having a problem. Really made me think about how leadership, you know, what the leadership does has an influence on what people below them are willing to do. So they set the norms for the profession. And if the leaders are willing to go to an empathy circle and the leaders are willing to use empathic listening, then the people below them will be willing to do that because it's right, because it's something that you do. So it's worth trying to influence leaders. The second thing I'll say about, will people like doctors, people with a lot of status, be willing to sit in circles with, you know, someone who is like a graduate student or whatever? My experience is that really has to do with the credentials or the expertise of the person. So someone who is skilled at empathic listening and teaching people about empathic listening, they may not be a doctor, but as long as they have credibility about being a facilitator of this process, that's all that's needed. The doctors are not there for medical advice. So, you know, yeah, so that's my experience, is as long as the facilitators have some credibility as facilitators in this process, they're just teaching about that practice, then people would be willing to go sit with them, I think.
This group is credible, and that's why, you know,
Right.
I've been leaning on it right now.
Right.
And I mean,
that's exactly what I'm saying, right?
I trust Edwin. I trust the group, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're here to continue. You know, we're meeting next week. We're holding more empathy circles with your group there, and we're sort of brainstorming, and we're building a team to. We created a project website. So all these we're you know, kind of scaling up. We're bringing our attention to this and trying to brainstorm and scale up to you know, support you and, you know, keep developing this and reach out to our larger networks. And then we're gonna occupy the Capitol Mall. We're gonna demand that the left and right have empathy circles, and then we're gonna have Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Pence, and Trump take part in empathy circles from the top down. So we're gonna work on all these things together.
I have one more practical last ask.
Okay.
Which is, if it were possible, this is maybe you know, still be up to discussion. If it were possible that we come up with 2 times a day, or on certain days, and just, you know, go ahead and schedule something. I know that, for example, like what we did today around Eastern Standard Time around 1:30, something like that, seems to work, you know, for a lot of people. So if Edwin, if you could, if you have the energy and the interest and other people do, to create a schedule for now to do that, that would be, I would be so grateful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll schedule that offline with email, and I'm already seeing, you know, a couple of people have said yes, they're willing to support that. So yeah, we can have that as sort of a next step as well. So yeah.
Thank you guys. Good night.